Welcome, Soul Family, to another episode of Awaken with Carla, the podcast that empowers you to awaken your mind, nurture your body, heal your heart, and nourish your soul. I am your host, Carla, and I'm so honored to have you here with me today. In each episode, as you know, we cover a variety of different topics from health, wellness, spirituality, mindset, manifestation, all with the intention of guiding you towards unlocking your infinite potential. Together, we'll embark on a transformative journey of self-discovery where we'll gain practical tools, inspiring insights, and learn from personal stories that can inspire you to create positive changes in your life. So, without further ado, let's start today's episode by introducing our guest speaker, Jim Marshall. Jim Marshall is a polymathic intellect who has devoted over 50,000 hours to the study and practice of multiple dimensions of human potential and development. He has successfully treated and trained hundreds of clients over a 40-year career and is the inventor of Septemics and several consciousness expanding systems. His areas of expertise include psychology, philosophy, theology, science, engineering, mathematics, law, literature, history, music, organization, metaphysics, military science, political science, physical culture, and education. And in this episode, we're going to be exploring how to decode the human behavior by using and understanding the Septemics Hierarchy. Jim Marshall shares with us a little bit of insights about what the Septemic Hierarchy is and provides us with some practical tools and powerful techniques that can help us to transform our lives in profound ways. Now, whether you're here because you're seeking physical health, emotional healing, spiritual awakening, or simply just to align your mindset for success, then you're definitely in the right place. Our intention is to provide you with the tools and the inspiration that you need to create a life that is much more fulfilling, filled with abundance, purpose, and meaning. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey. And remember that the power to transform lies within you. Now, quick reminder before we jump in, if you like this episode, please make sure to like, share, subscribe, and even download the episode depending on wherever it is that you're listening to this episode. So get ready to ignite your curiosity, expand your consciousness, and awaken the extraordinary that lies within you. Now let's dive into today's episode of Awaken with Carla. Welcome, Jim, and thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time to jump on this call with me and come on the Awakened with Carla podcast. I'd love to, chat with you a little bit more today. I know you have a book called Septemics, and I want to just pick your brain about what that's all about. Now, before we do jump in and, get more into depths on the book, if you could just start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Okay, well, I am the discoverer of hitherto unknown natural phenomena, which greatly aid in the understanding of people, from which I constructed a revolutionary practical system called Septemics, and published it in the book Septemics Hierarchies of Human Phenomena. As to my qualifications, I am a polymathic intellectual whose areas of expertise include psychology, philosophy, theology, parapsychology, science, engineering, mathematics, law, literature, history, metaphysics, military science, political science, physical culture, education, organization, and music. And I hold a Bachelor of Science cum laude from City University of New York.
Wow, you have quite a depth of knowledge on a variety of different subjects. That's incredible. So how did you, or when did sort of this idea of the book Septemics come to be? How long, I guess, or when were you inspired to write this book? And maybe if you can tell us a little bit about what is Septemics.
Okay. Well, first I'll tell you what Septemics is, and then I'll tell you how it came about.
Sure.
Septemics is a philosophical science based on the fact that many phenomena related to human beings occur in a sequence of 7 levels. Literally, the word septemics means of or pertaining to 7. Septemics comprises a collection of scales or sequences, each of which breaks down various human phenomena into a hierarchy of 7 steps. There are 35 such scales, each of which is unique. And between them, they span the spectrum of human experience, meaning any situation, dilemma, or problem that arises in the life of any person can successfully be analyzed by one or more of these scales.
Okay.
24 of the scales apply primarily to individuals and 11 apply primarily to groups. Now, as to how this came about, the story really starts when I was 16 and I was accepted into an elite engineering school, which I attended on academic scholarship. Now, when I started, I thought I was going to be engineering physical things like electrons or airfoils or motors or something. But by the time I had my bachelor's degree, I realized I wanted to engineer none of those things, but rather the human psyche. Because that is what's unknown, and that is where we are failing miserably.
Yes.
95% of the problems that people have in industrialized society are because they don't understand people, both themselves and others. So this book came much later, but it solves that problem. Now, what happened then is to make a long story short, I became a human development engineer. And I had a long career working one-on-one with hundreds of different people over cumulatively thousands of hours. Now, while I was doing this, all of my clients improved, and I started to notice, incidentally, that they improved in ways that were predictable to me. Now, I never told that to anyone, but I made notes. And as the years went by, the notes got greater, and I came to realize that my clients would be at a specific scale on a specific axis. In other words, there would be a certain level, and I would know how the session was going to resolve, that they would go up to the next level on that scale that I had written down from what I observed. And this happened thousands and thousands of times, which just made me more certain that these were correct. Now, by about 1995, I had about 32 scales of varying lengths between 3 and 7 levels. And I had one scale in particular that by then I absolutely knew was correct from long usage. Now, in 95, I realized one day that that 6-level scale actually had a 7th level. And when I inserted that 7th level into the 6th-level scale, it manifested mathematically. And instead of being a scale, it became a plane. In other words, all of these phenomena presented themselves that were of a mathematical nature. Now, when I saw this, having taken 26 semesters of math, I said, whoa, I don't know what this is, but it's big. This is natural law, because anything that has math embedded in it is natural law. For example, the Fibonacci sequence.
Right.
So then I said, I wonder how many of these other scales that I have are also 7-level scales, which hadn't been developed all the way because I wasn't developing anything. I was just helping my clients and making notes. So knowing what I was looking for, I studied all these other scales, and they all went to 7 levels pretty quickly. And as each one went to 7 levels, it manifested mathematically. So by the time I had these 32 7-level scales, this was all in 95, I said, wait a minute, this is a new subject. This is not a subset of something else that's already known. I've stumbled across something. So then I said, the big implication to me was, I could go from helping people by the hundreds, which is what I had been doing as a human development engineer, to helping people by the millions if I put this in a book and get it out.
Right.
So the first draft of the book was written in December of 95, and I sent it to colleagues of mine, all of whom had graduate degrees in a variety of areas, and they all loved it. And these were people I knew how they think, I knew their education and so forth. So I knew I had something then. So then I devoted the next 25 years of my life to perfecting this system. So you have to realize, first I had to discover the phenomena. And as I explained before, that was largely done by 95, although I did find 3 more scales as I was writing the book. Then I had to use this data to craft a workable philosophic system that was always workable for everybody. That took 20 years.
Wow.
Now, while all this was going on, the big challenge that I had, the most time-consuming aspect of this, was to present this in a way that would make sense to the average reader of English. And that took an enormous amount of work. This book was rewritten many times. I kept releasing it each time a rewrite was done, releasing it to friends and students and colleagues and so forth, and getting feedback. The feedback was uniformly positive, but I would get little things that would suggest better ways to explain it. For example, I wound up putting a glossary not only in front of each chapter, but even in front of the introduction itself. So the 35 scales, I'm telling you with precision what words mean, the words that I'm using in the scales and the names of the scales. I'm telling you exactly what I mean. So that facilitates understanding. Now, if you read the book, you don't look at the glossaries, I can't help that. But the glossaries are not that big and not hard to read. So I've had 27 years of feedback since the book was published, because after 25 years, I said, well, I'm not going to live forever. I might as well publish this. I know it's workable. So I published it, and I spent the last 2 years promoting it like this. And I have to say, nobody has ever read this book that said anything like, I don't get it, or this doesn't make any sense, or anything like that. What I usually get from people who read this book is something in the nature of, wow. But many people say, this blew me away. I don't speak that way, but that's what they tell me.
Right.
So basically, each one of these 35 skills is a roadmap for the corresponding area of life. And at some point today, I'd like to read to you the names of the 35 skills so you see what subject matter is covered. And you'll see by the time I finish that I've pretty much covered human phenomena. Now, I want to say, in terms of how this helps people.
That was my next question. How does this relate?
I've had a lifetime of helping people. And I wrote this book specifically to help people. Now, each of these scales provides the reader with an infallible way of determining the salutariness or beneficialness of any group, individual, or activity. If the group, individual, or activity moves persons or groups up these scales, it's positive or beneficial. If it moves them down, it's detrimental or negative. There's no ambiguity here. More importantly, just finding out what level you or another person is at on any scale is by itself enlightening and beneficial. And finally, once you know the actual level of any person on any scale, you can improve that person by moving them up one level. And that's important because I have solved the gradient problem. Every competent teacher, facilitator, coach, therapist in the world understands gradients. You have to work with a person according to gradients, okay? Anything regarding human development, there has to be the right gradient. It can't be too fast, it can't be too slow, it can't be too hot, can't be too cold. You got to find the right place to enter the case. And I have solved that problem because each of these scales gives you the gradients for the corresponding area.
Okay.
Now, people have asked me sometimes, what book is your book like? And I have to tell them in all candor, there's never been a book like this before. But each of these 35 scales is very much like the periodic table of elements,
Okay.
although it's for the corresponding area. It's like a periodic table of thought, for example. There's 7
Okay.
levels of thought. So let me read you just the names of the chapters so you'll see the subject matter that gets covered. This only takes
Please,
about
yeah.
a minute.
I think that will
These
give
are the
that'll give some context for the readers, or not the readers, so
Right.
the audience.
Right. So these are the individual scales, meaning they apply more to individuals than to groups. The scale of basic purposes, the scale of personal influence, the scale of tricks, the scale of permeation, the scale of thought, the scale of identity, the scale of evaluation, the scale of motivation, the scale of control, the scale of stopping, the scale of scholarship, the scale of literacy, the scale of human ability, the scale of memory, the scale of spiritual identity, the scale of mental deletion, the scale of aberration, the scale of physical fitness, the scale of justification, the scale of belief, the scale of equanimity, the scale of attack, the scale of conflict, and the scale of reaction. And these are the group scales: the scale of relationships, the scale of life spheres, the scale of government, the scale of civilization, the scale of survival, the scale of management, the scale of exchange, the scale of communication, the scale of allegiance, the scale of sexuality, and the scale of politics. Each one of these scales can dramatically improve the life of the reader, depending on the person, on what's going on in his life, what difficulties he has. So some people will get more mileage out of one scale than another because there's more relevance. So as you can see, because each of these scales is unique, if you get the book, you'll see you can't infer anything about scale A by studying scale B. So there's a tremendous difference. The only thing they have in common is that they all have 7 levels. The data in this book are vital for every human being and can help you to achieve your goals faster and easier by explaining what might otherwise seem to be inexplicable or random. If someone were to invite you to a rendezvous, you would certainly expect them to tell you the time, the date, the location, and perhaps how to get there. Now, needless to say, it's very difficult to get somewhere if you don't know where you are, don't know where you're going, and don't know how to get to your destination. Now, this sounds idiotic, but most people do this regularly. And many people do this consistently.
Right.
And this book solves that problem because it tells you across 35 axes where you are, you find your level, and the next level up is your destination. Now, if you're level 5, you will be able to get to level 4 if you make an effort.
Okay.
But if you try to get to level 1, 2, or 3, you will fail because there's too steep a gradient. So this tells you across 35 axes how to advance yourself. So it's very specific. So you can use this to understand yourself by finding your level on each scale and then moving yourself up. But you can also use it on other people. For example, the scale of motivation. So you can use the scale of motivation, and basically it posits that there are only 7 basic motivations. All the others are subsets of these.
Okay.
So you can ask yourself, What is my motivation toward my brother? What is my motivation toward my mother? What is my motivation toward my daughter? What is my motivation toward my boss? And so forth. But you can also say, what is my father's motivation toward me? What is my boyfriend's motivation toward me? What is my next door neighbor's motivation toward me? Well, when you know someone's motivation, that tells you a lot.
Right.
That's very often the difference between whether you want to be around this person or not. So, for example, to continue this motivation theme, let's say we have a guy, he's dating a woman, he's thinking of marrying her. And it would be smart for him to figure out what her motivation is. Why does she want to marry this guy? Right. Is it because she loves him, which is the highest motivation of all, level one? Or is it because he drives a Lamborghini, he owns a yacht, and he lives in a palace? Right. See, that's a completely different motivation. Now, for some people, that second motivation might be acceptable. But for a lot of people, it's not.
Right.
So determining the girlfriend or the boyfriend's motivation could be the difference between marrying the person and breaking up the relationship. But either way, the person will be happy because it's the truth.
Right.
So either, if he finds out, oh, she's at level one, that's good, she loves me, good. So there's a happy ending there. But if he finds out she has some lower motivation, then he can save himself from a bad marriage or a divorce.
Right. Or a
this book,
decades long of pain and suffering.
Yes. So this book can definitely forestall or prevent catastrophes, disasters, bankruptcies, indictments, fistfights, broken families. All kinds of bad things can be prevented by using this data because you have insight into the person.
Right.
So, for example, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask, how would one person, in the book, do you get into how to move from one skill to the next, or do you just identify what they are?
Well, it varies from scale to scale. In many cases, it's obvious because the scale tells you. You see, you find yourself at a certain level, so you're doing X, and then you look above it and see why. You say, oh, that's better than what I'm doing now. You see, so you move to there. So very often it's self-explanatory.
Okay.
But there's a whole section in the book, in the introduction, about how to use it to help yourself and how to use it to help others. So I hasten to add, never tell anyone anyone's level on any scale. It's counterproductive and unethical. Now, it's okay, I think, to tell the level of deceased people. So throughout the book, I actually give levels of people who are deceased, like Abe Lincoln and George Washington. And then you can study the person and you can say, okay, I see how this works. For example, Alexander Hamilton was at level 2 on the scale basic purposes. He and Thomas Jefferson were foes, political foes. Jefferson was at level 3. This is a big difference between these two levels. So they were natural enemies. It wasn't so much that Hamilton hated Jefferson, but Jefferson really hated Hamilton. And when you study this, you can see that was baked in the cake. There's it's like hounds and hares, they're like natural enemies.
Yes.
So, for instance, I have a client, very successful person, very smart person. And this person is at a certain level on the scale of basic purposes. It's not hard to figure out. By the way, he knows where it is because he got the book. He knows what level he's at. I didn't tell him. He figured it out. But see, I already knew because I studied it. So that tells me a lot about this guy. I know kind of how to deal with him in a successful way, to because I know he's at that level.
Mm.
And for me, that's true basically for everybody. Like I can listen to someone talk for 10 or 15 minutes, like in a little conversation. And as a result of that, know where that person is on the scale of literacy.
Okay.
Now you might say, well, how does that help you? I had clients who came to me from Europe whose first language was not English.
Mhm.
So I had to help them deal with sophisticated subjects when their level of literacy was below that of most of my clients.
Okay.
So I had to be careful about how I explain things and what words I used. So I was able to do it, but if I didn't know that, see, if I didn't have that knowledge, it wouldn't have gone as well as it did. So the whole idea of this book is you're forewarned. You're forewarned is forearmed. So you know what kind of a person you're dealing with. And in some places that tells you, this is a person I want around me. And in some cases it tells you, this is not a person I want around me. For example, the scale of basic purposes. The lowest level of all, level 7, is the purpose to destroy. Now, a lot of people will have trouble grasping that there are people whose basic purpose is to destroy.
Yes.
There's not a lot of them, but they do exist, and Hitler was one of them. So if you study him, as I have, you can see he was destructive. He was destructive to everybody. He wasn't just destructive to the Allies. He was destructive to the Wehrmacht. He was destructive to his own political party. He was destructive to everybody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the more you study him, the more obvious this is. So if the people of Germany had this book, and when in 1933, actually it was at the end of 32 when the election took place, 1933, the Nazis won a plurality. They won 37% of the vote. That wouldn't have happened if people had this book. They would have looked at this and said, this is destructive. I'm not voting for this guy. So would he have gotten some votes? Of course. You know who would have voted for him? Psychopaths, sociopaths, criminals, crazy people, corrupt people. Okay. But is that 37%? No, it's not.
Right.
So another party would have won the plurality because those votes would have gone elsewhere. You see? And so the world could have been saved from 60 million deaths and hundreds of millions of people whose lives were wrecked, even though they weren't killed.
Wow.
So that is how this works. And I can tell you, when I was a young person, this material didn't exist. I hadn't discovered it. So I made the same stupid mistakes as everybody else. And I was involved with some people who I never should have involved with. Now today, for me, that cannot happen, will not happen, and does not happen. So I'll meet somebody, one of my doctors or maybe my lawyer or my neighbor, whatever, and just by talking to them, I can spot them on these various scales. And it tells me a lot. So for example, when Obama ran for president, most of us in America had no idea who he was or anything about him.
Right.
Because he was elected senator, and 2 years later, he started running for president. Well, most people don't know the senators from the other 49 states.
Right.
So I said, who is this guy? So I thought, well, if he's running for president, I better find out. So I listened to him. I observed him. And I was able to infer his basic purpose. Now, I'm not going to tell you what it was, but it informed me about him. And then I knew a lot about him, because your basic purpose is what the person is trying to do.
Right. Right.
So that's how my life goes now. So, I mean, I can spot people on scales without attempting to spot them on scales.
I can imagine
You know,
now. That's probably all you see.
I'll talk to some guy and I'll see that, just from what he said, he's at a low level on the scale of literacy, for example, or low level on the scale of attack. And these are very important things. If you read the chapters, you'll see how important these distinctions are. This is not subtle stuff. And I'll tell you something else. It's not hard to use this material. I engineered this to wrap around the reader. So the way people experience this book is, it's like you put on your eyeglasses and you look at yourself in the mirror. And then you say, oh, I see. When I was young, I used to be able to shave without my glasses.
Right.
Now, if I don't use my glasses when I shave, it doesn't come out too good because I can't see it that way. So each of these 35 scales is like a lens. So you hold up this lens and you look at Joe through this lens. You look at Mary through this lens. You look at your daughter through this lens. And it's not a question of being judgmental. It's a question of knowing what you're dealing with. For example, if somebody says, oh, come and look at my garden, I like flowers. Okay, I'll come. So I go to this guy's garden. Oh, he's got forget-me-nots, he's got tulips, he's got roses, he's got violets, he's got irises, So I know these flowers, and so I can identify them. So, for example, this has implications. Most people don't know that the rose is in the same botanical family with the apple.
Oh,
genetically, a rose has much more in common with an apple than it does with a tulip. A tulip grows from a bulb, it goes right out of the ground. Whereas a rose and an apple grow from a bush or a tree. Okay? So again, just my knowledge of botany, I can see there's a difference here. If you ask me, you ask somebody who doesn't know anything about botany, which of these three things, which two belong together? Somebody doesn't know any botany, say, well, the tulip and the rose belong together. See, I would say that. I would say the rose and the apple belong together because they're in the same botanical family. Their structure, their existence is much more closely aligned than a tulip. It's a completely different system of life. So that's what this is about. So it's not about being judgmental. It's just about seeing what's there. Now, the truth is that very few people, like 1%, are at or near the top of all the scales.
I'm sorry, can you say that again? They're at?
About 1% of people are either at or near the top of all the scales.
Okay.
It's a very, very rare condition. A larger group of people, maybe 2%, are at or near the bottom of all the scales. Most of us are high on some scales and low on other scales. That's the norm. And I'll give you an example. I have a friend who's a doctor. And I had just finished reading a famous novel, which millions of people have read. And so I just socially, I saw the person. I said, I read this. It's a really good book. Can't read it. She said, okay. So I give her the book. So the next time I saw this person, like a week or two later, she gave it back to me. And she said, and I quote, she said, I can't read this book. This is a doctor. Okay. Now you would think that somebody who has a graduate degree would be able to read a popular novel that millions of people have read. And not all those people have graduate degrees or even college degrees. Right? Well, what is this? What's going on here? Well, what's going on here is this person, despite having a graduate degree, was low on the scale of literacy. Now, most people think, well, either you're literate or you're illiterate. No, there are 7 levels of literacy. And this makes a difference. Like, if you're going to hire a gardener, you don't really care how literate he is.
Right.
You want somebody who knows how to take care of flowers and shrubs and lawns, right?
Mhm. Right.
He might be subliterate. Whereas if you're hiring somebody to help you rewrite your book, then you want somebody who's literate. You see?
Mm-hmm.
So this is how you can use these scales. Now realize that some of them are general scales and some of them are specific scales. Now in a general scale, you find your level and you're done. Like in the scale of basic purposes, every human being has one of those 7 basic purposes. When you find your level, it's an epiphany. It's a life-changing experience. You throw out the other 6 levels, you say, they're not for me. This is for me, you see? And then your life is much clearer, much simpler. You know what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
It simplifies your life. You're not wandering and searching. You're done with that scale. Now,
Right.
in a specific scale, like I mentioned, the scale of motivation, you could use it 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 ways.
Mm.
I mean, there's no limit to how many times you can use a specific scale. Because like you look at it in certain contexts. So, did you have a question?
I was just going to ask, so you're saying in some instances with the scales, it's okay to be at the scale that we're at, whereas in other scales, the scale that we're at is just sort of the starting point to help us figure out where we are and where we want to go in terms of improving on that scale.
Okay, I want to make sure I understand. So you have 35 scales and each has 7 levels, right? So you find a level or you find another person's level. And that tells you where you or that other person is relative to that particular axis, right?
Right.
Now, generally speaking, you find your level and then you target the next level up. That becomes your objective in that context.
Right.
Which saves you a tremendous amount of struggle and people have situations they don't know what to do. This eliminates that. So you find out where you are. I'll give you an example. Most people have children, and most parents have children who have trouble in school. Not necessarily trouble all the time, but some trouble in school. So the scale of scholarship shows there are 7 levels of scholarship. And I explain with specificity in that chapter how to make someone a better scholar. So dad notices that little Johnny is getting D's and says he doesn't want to go to school anymore, right? So assuming that the kid is old enough to read this book, let's say he's 12 or 13, okay? So you say, read this glossary. He reads the glossary. Then you say, look at the scale. It says right there, scale of scholarship. And you say to him, where are you on the scale? And what will happen is in a matter of seconds, 20 seconds, 25 seconds, 30 seconds, he will find a bracket, usually. He'll say, well, I'm either at 3 or 4. And you say, okay, now let's have you read the text. So he reads the chapter. He wants to read the chapter, see, because he's interested in it now. What is it? Is it 3 or is it 4? And then after he reads, and I tell you in detail what it means to be at these different levels, then the dad says, okay, look again. Now, where are you? And he'll say, oh, I'm at level 4. And he will be happy about that because a weight has just been lifted from him. The light bulb just went on over his head. And then the dad says, okay, let's move you to level 3. And then the dad helps the kid move from level 4 to level 3, and he is a better scholar without hiring a tutor or anything else.
Oh, okay.
See, so just take that scenario and expand it out in a billion different directions, and you get what this book is about.
Well, I'm curious to dive into this book and see how it sort of helps me learn a little bit more about who I am and how I can sort of grow and improve and better navigate the world around me.
Yes, that's what it's about. Now, let me
Yeah.
tell you, I tell this to all my readers and students. This is a textbook on a new subject. This is not a version of something else. This doesn't fit into any other niche. It
Mhm.
is a new subject. So study this the way you would study a chemistry text, a physics text, a math text, an economics text, okay? You start on line 1 of page 1 and you go through line by line. You don't skip anything. And when you get to the end, you'll have an understanding of it and you go back to the beginning, read it a second time. And when you come to each scale, find your level on every scale. And by the time you get through, you will have found your level on 35 different scales, and you will be a remarkably enhanced person. Your
Mhm.
mind will be clearer about yourself.
Mhm.
Then, if you want, you can use this on other people. Let's say you have a husband. You can assess your husband on all these different scales. And then you have an understanding, like the scale of choice. That's a big deal. How a person deals with choice. It makes a
Mhm.
difference. You know,
Yes.
I have a client who's very smart and very successful, makes a ton of money, has trouble making choices. He's just not high on that scale. So, you know, if you say to this guy, well, where do you want to go to eat? Oh boy, are you in for an adventure? You see, I wouldn't
S-
do that. I would say, hmm?
I was just going to ask, so knowing that about him, how are you using the Septemics to sort of help navigate that relationship? Like, how do
Okay, so
you then change and adapt how you frame or ask that question, knowing
so
what sort of level he's at?
so I would say, I'd like to go out to dinner and I'd like to take you to the Olive Garden.
Okay.
See? And because he's not a very decisive person, he's probably going to say, okay. Now, if he says, well, I don't like the Olive Garden, I'd say, okay, let's go to this other restaurant. You see? So that's different from, uh, you know, you don't want to get thrown into a situation where a person can't make a decision. Now, this, if you were to do business with this person, like have this person in your company,
Mhm.
you have to be aware of that because you're going to have real problems.
Right.
Good. So being decisive is often touted as an important trait of a leader. A leader has to be decisive. He has to make a decision.
Mhm.
So, you know, a person who can't make choices, that affects this person's life significantly.
Right.
And it helps you to know. Now realize that there's 35 axes. I'm talking about one axis here.
Mhm.
So,
And
you know, like I knew one person who was tremendously successful person, made a ton of money, but was very low on some important scales. I mean, on the scale of literacy, this person was subliterate, which is like level 6, maybe semi-literate at most. Not what I would call literate. I would never give that person a book, you know, here's a good book. Read this book by Leon Uris, you know, whatever. He's
right.
not going to read it. He's not going to read it. And if he did read it, he wouldn't be able to finish it. And if he did finish it, he still wouldn't understand anyway what was in it. So,
Right.
so you know, my whole career was about handling clients and figuring out where is this person at? What's going on with this person?
Mhm.
And getting the person at the level he's at and then moving him up to a level that he can attain.
Right.
So this is something that most people are not able to do. For me, this was a whole career.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what this book is about. It's understanding people, not just having the usual superficial. So, for example, I know the basic purpose of every president of the United States going back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, because I studied them. And I know the basic purpose of many of the presidents before Roosevelt, who I studied, like Lincoln and Jefferson and Washington. So that's important. That puts it in a context.
Right.
So, Roger, what's his name? Roger Stone wrote a book in which he alleges that Lyndon Baines Johnson was behind the assassination of John F. Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very detailed, specific book. Now, knowing what I know about Lyndon Baines Johnson, that's not hard for me to grasp. Because not only do I know his basic purpose, I know a lot of things about him through this book. See, people who don't know it would say, oh, that's shocking. I can't believe it,
Right.
So it really opens doors to many areas to get you to understand people. Because there are 35 axes and everybody is somewhere on all 35 scales, people are complicated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Bill Clinton, for example, in his profession is at a very high level. Read his books, or listen to him speak. He's highly intelligent and very well informed in his field. Even his enemies admit that. But if you look at the way he treats women,
Mm-hmm.
this is no surprise to anybody who's been around in the past 30 years. He's a serial abuser of women.
Mm-hmm. So
we're talking about a guy who's high in one area, low in another area. Now, the common denominator of all of this is insight. If a person is insightful in a certain area, he's high on that scale. So Bill Clinton, on the scale of human ability in his profession as a politician, is very insightful. But when it comes to romantic relationships, like the scale of sexuality,
mm-hmm.
he's not very insightful, or he wouldn't do the things he does. Right. He has all these women suing him.
Right.
So, go ahead.
Do the scales, are they all sort of in silos or independent, or do some of them interconnect and have an impact on, so maybe my question is, if you're in a particular axis or in a particular scale, let's say you're at a low level, will that have an impact on another scale in what sort of level you would be at on that other scale? Or are they all independent?
The short answer is yes. One of the axioms of this subject, I don't usually go into axioms because most people don't want to hear about axioms, but one of the axioms of this subject is being high on any scale is both a cause and an effect of being high on any other scale. And being low on any scale is both a cause and an effect of being low in any other scale. So there are generally downscale people. Like the type of person who would be in an oppressive group like the KKK, who went around lynching innocent Black people, or the mafia, professional criminals. Those are mostly downscale people.
Right.
Okay. That's why they're in those groups, like the Nazis. Most of the Nazis were pretty downscale people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, when you're talking about groups, there's always a bell curve. There's always a few people in it, there are a few people in the mafia who are not psychopaths or sociopaths. There are. If you study it, and I can name some of these people. But same thing with the Nazi Party. Like Werner von Braun, he was an SS officer. He was not a bad person. He was not a generally downscale person, even though he was even though he was an SS officer. Same thing with Albert Speer, who was Hitler's architect. Okay? He was not a very downscale person. Did he do some bad things? Yes. But it's different from somebody like Hermann Goering. Hermann Goering was a downscale person.
Mm-hmm.
No, he wasn't. His basic purpose was not as low as Hitler's. He was one level up. But still, he was no Mr. Rogers, It was, but so, you'll find that in any group. I mean, like there are people in the Catholic Church who were saints, who were true saints, who could perform miracles. And there were people in the Catholic Church who were in the Inquisition, who tortured people and killed people and jailed people, lots of people, okay? So when you talk about groups, are there some people, are there some bad cops? Yes, there are some bad cops, but they're not all bad. Some of them are perfectly nice people, or the same thing in the military. Are there some bad people in the military? Yes, there are some bad people but most of them are not. So, you have to be careful when you generalize about groups.
Right.
But it depends on the group, what group. I mean, if you have a group like, what is it, the Daughters of the American Revolution? This group that's been around for many generations, it's like a club, a woman's club, and they have something to do with the revolution, American Revolution. There's not a lot of bad people in that group. It's probably a few.
Right.
But not like in the mafia. Most of the people in the mafia are either psychopaths or sociopaths. That's why they're in the mafia. Right. But not all of them. So this book really, yes, it can be used on groups, but its main application is really individuals. Spotting the individual and deciding how are you going to deal with the individual. Do you want this person around you? Like I bump into people, sometimes even on the internet, who I can spot as downscale people. I don't want to do business with this person. Have a nice day. Goodbye. That's it. I don't make a crusade about it. I just move on. Right. As opposed to sometimes I meet people who are really upscale people, I mean, I've known some saintly people in my life. You could almost see the halo around them. Right. I know a few people like that. They're like, extraordinary people. So the highest level on the scale of basic purposes is the saint. So that's people like Jesus, Gautama, Gandhi, right. A lot of the saints like Pope John Paul II, who's now on the road to canonization. I don't know if they've actually made him a saint yet, but he'll be a saint. So, I mean, they have a very distinct criteria and process they have to go through. But, obviously you don't have to be a Christian to be a saint. I just said, Gautama, right, the founder of Buddhism, obviously his goal was to transcend, and that's what makes a saint. That's his goal, to transcend. That person is completely different from the people at the other 6 levels. Right. So this really helps you sort people out. Figure out, who do you want to give money to? Who do you want to have in your life? Who do you want to date? Who do you want to hire? Who do you want your children to be around? And it really makes that clear. And there's no hocus pocus. This does not rely on intuition. You don't have to make a novena. You don't have to go to the Delphic Oracle, to find out.
Right.
It's because people tell you their levels. They tell you. It comes right out of their mouths. If you listen and watch, it's there. You can see it. More so because people don't know about this. They don't know about this data.
Yes. So can you give us an example of like how someone shows you what level they're at? I know you mentioned the literacy one, which I think is probably maybe one of the more simpler ones to identify, but with some of the other more like personal or internal things, like how do you decipher or what are some of the clues, I guess, that you pick up on that help you figure out where they're at on their levels if you don't know them too intimately or too deeply?
Well, first of all, there are two completely separate aspects to this. One aspect is knowing the material, how well you know the material. If you know the material very well, it's not hard at all. And I'll give you an example. 7 of the scales have what I would describe as an inflow-outflow. So one level is an outflow, the next level is an inflow, the next level is an outflow, the next level is an inflow. So when I say inflow is like withdrawing, as opposed to an outflow, that's like reaching. So you can look at a person and say, is this person withdrawing or reaching? So for example, I knew some religious people, they were clearly withdrawing. They were withdrawing from this world. They were interested in going to heaven. That was it. They were withdrawing, you see? So just by seeing that withdrawal aspect, 3 levels get thrown out. All the reach aspects get thrown out. Then you say, well, is it 1, 3, 5, or 7? Well, when you're dealing between 1, 3, and 5, and 7, those are big differences. So it's not hard to spot them.
Right.
So that's just one example. So using it on yourself, if you can be brutally honest with yourself, I'm not saying you tell anybody any of this. You just be honest with yourself. Where am I regarding thought? And you look at the scale of thought and you can see, okay, I'm here. But you realize when you study the chapters, I explain in detail in a long paragraph or multiple paragraphs what each level means and how it manifests. So it's very specific. So you can read it and say, well, this doesn't fit me at all, So you throw that one out. And every time you throw a level out, you're selecting from a smaller group. So what normally happens, as I said before, is if you show somebody a scale, I'm talking about somebody who doesn't know anything about this. You stop some guy in the street, show him the scale of motivation or show him the scale of thought. Say, where are you on the scale of thought? He'll look at it and he'll say, well, I'm probably either at 4, 5, or 6. See, he just threw out 4 levels. So he only has to select now from 3. So then you say, okay, read this chapter. So he reads the chapter, preferably after looking at the glossary. And then he comes back and he says, well, now that I read this, I can see I'm at level 4. Bingo. You just found his level. And why is that good? Because now he knows his target is level 3. That's what he should be focusing on. So let's take the scale of physical fitness. There are 7 levels of physical fitness. Now, I've worked as a holistic health practitioner. That's part of my job as a human development engineer, because when people come in, sometimes they have mental problems, sometimes they have physical problems, and sometimes they have organizational problems. So I sort of learned that you have to assess what's really going on with here. Like I had one person who came to me, was interested in doing some sort of expansion of consciousness type work. Well, I found that this person's life was a train wreck.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, before we do anything like that, we need to try to get your life in some order. So we went through, I used these techniques that I have, and we went through the different areas of her life and actually had her doing things like cleaning the basement, balancing the checkbook, painting the garage,
Mm-hmm.
And by the time we were done, some months went by, this person had an orderly life. This was a huge difference.
Right.
Somebody who hadn't seen this person, who then shows up, would say, wow, what happened to you?
Mm-hmm.
So I would have to assess that, you see, in helping the person. So if I look at the scale of physical fitness, I discovered that a lot of people would come to me for help on sort of mental emotional problems. And they had physical problems, actual physical problems. I had one client who I worked with for many years. Okay. We're talking about hundreds of hours of counseling with this person. This person hadn't had a good night's sleep in maybe 30, 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
This person didn't exercise at all. This person really didn't get any decent supplementation. So I put this person on a health program, a health regimen. So I was using the scale of physical fitness.
Mm-hmm.
And I moved this person up to a point where this person was dramatically improved. I mean, again, if you just walked in the room and looked at the person, you'd say, wow, what happened to you?
Right.
So then I got this person into individual counseling on specific subjects, family things, the sort of things that we go over in psychotherapy. And the person did very well. But I was smart enough to see this person was low on the scale of physical fitness. Let's move this person up to a higher level. Because one of the things I did in my practice is I used biofeedback.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, if you are in a very poor physical state, the biofeedback will either not work at all or will work very poorly. The person who's in good physical condition, you can really use the biofeedback. You can really see easily, quickly, effectively, accurately what's going on with that person. Somebody who's run down, they're below the biofeedback. You have to be up to a certain level of health to do it. Just as you have to be up to a certain level of health to play tennis.
Right.
So a lot of it depends on the person, the situation, what the best way to use this is to help somebody is you observe somebody has some serious problem or situation or dilemma. Like you might have some girlfriend who can't get a date. Guys don't like her, okay? And you can help this person. So you can get this person to look at specific scales that are relevant to this. And find the person's level. You don't tell the person the level. You have them study it and say, where are you on this scale? And because this is a relevant scale, the person will be interested.
Right.
The person says, oh, you mean there's a scale of sexuality? And when they read the chapter, they'll see that I've covered all the different aspects of this. And they'll say, oh, yeah, I'm here at level 5. That's not so good. And then you can say, okay, let's move you up to level 4. Right? So then 2 months later, you hear she's going out with some guy, Joe. You see? That's how it works.
So this is really like a roadmap to self-discovery, realization, self-improvement, maybe even self-actualization, like to help us actualize some aspects of ourselves or dreams of ourselves that we want to bring into reality.
Well, all of that is true, but the real focus of this is that it helps people achieve their goals faster and easier.
Right.
Like this hypothetical woman we just discussed, maybe like most women, she wants to find Mr. Right and get married and have a family, right? She's making no progress on that. So she has this goal. She may be hopeless about it, but still it's a goal. So you can help this person achieve that goal faster or easier, instead of it being, a slog, a suffering, going out with 50 guys before she finds one she likes. If you use this book, she can just talk to a guy for 5 minutes and say, this guy's low on the scale of literacy. I don't want to go out with this guy. Or this guy can't make a choice, low on the scale of choice. Or this guy is a coward. He's low on the scale of attack. I don't want to be around that guy. So, everything is facilitated by this. That's really what this is about, to help people do better.
Right.
Now, realization, self-realization, having deep insights into your personality, clarifying your mind, those are all benefits. But when you look at this across the 35 axes, this is a way to move yourself forward in the way that you want to move forward, not in the way somebody else wants you to do it. Like you'll have, years ago, my parents used to pester me about getting married and having kids. Why aren't you married? Why don't you have kids? I had a career. I was devoted to my career. And it's not like I was waiting tables, I was making money, I was helping people, I was highly regarded. So, I didn't allow them to enforce their values on me. So this puts you in the driver's seat.
Right.
And I'm not saying you should use it in a judgmental way. You shouldn't. You should just say, this is where this guy is at. I don't hate Hitler. I have many close Jewish friends. Many. Many of my best friends are Jewish. I get along great with Jewish people. I don't know why, but I do. So you would think that I would hate Hitler. I don't hate Hitler. The man was obviously mentally ill. In addition to being mentally ill, he was stupid. He did stupid things. Spending men and materiel to oppress harmless civilians in a time of war is stupid.
Right.
Of course it's evil. Everybody knows that. But it's also stupid. He was not a smart person. He was not a good person, but I don't hate him. What is the value of my hating anybody? There's no value to it. It's not productive.
No. And holding that kind of energy in our own body is actually more detrimental to us than it is to the person that we're trying to cast that energy onto.
Absolutely. And that theme comes up throughout the book, where you get to higher levels, where you let go of things, and because if you look at the top of most of these scales, it's in a sort of a very serene kind of a state. Like we talked about the scale of choice. The highest level is no choice necessary.
No.
Now, this person, it's not necessary for this person to make a choice. This is a transcendent person.
Are the levels in any way connected? Well, it sounds like to me that they may be connected to different sort of levels of consciousness. Is that a good way of maybe
Well,
sort of making
they
sense?
correspond to a variety of things. Some of the scales interlock with other scales in very specific ways, which is another useful tool, and I explain that in great detail in the book in those specific cases. There are some scales where level 7 on one scale is level 1 on another scale. There are some scales where this scale and this scale run together, but the other one is upside down. It's inverted. So I explained all of that. Those are just the way those things manifest. But again, I have to emphasize every scale is unique. Some people, you always enter the scale at level 1. In some cases, you always enter the scale at level 7. In some cases, you always enter the scale at level 4. It varies.
Okay.
And that's part of the power of this thing, that, it's not one size fits all. There are these 35 different scales that each have their own workability and their own function. I did not make this up. I just observed it.
Right.
And wrote
documented
it
down. Yes.
Right. Yeah. So in that regard, it's very like what Dmitri Mendeleev did with the periodic table. He was a physical scientist, and he looked at this and he said, there's some correlation here. Hydrogen goes here and helium is over here. And then we have lithium, He saw that pattern. Or a really good example is how Nikola Tesla invented the alternating current motor.
Right.
He saw it in his head.
Mm-hmm.
He had a picture in his head. This is how we could have an alternating, and then he just made in the 3-dimensional universe what he saw in his head, and it worked. Now, everybody in the world is using that alternating current motor to create all the electricity, and it came out of his head.
Right.
Because he understood physical science.
Right.
So it's like, where did the 3 laws of motion come from? Well, they existed before there were people, the 3 laws of motion. If you studied them, they predate Earth. They predate the existence of Earth. And after Earth no longer exists, the 3 laws of motion will still be true. But Newton somehow saw them. He was able to study and see, okay, here's the way we explain this. In a simple way, 3 different things, and it became the basis of modern physics.
Interesting.
So, I discovered this empirically, and because of my polymathic background or outlook, I was able to recognize it for what it was.
Right.
And I think the biggest difference between me and most people is that I notice things.
Right. Observant.
Right.
Yeah.
So this has happened many times. I'll be with other people, and let's say a person will give a speech, and I will be able to infer something from that. This means he's going to run for president. The other people say, he didn't say that. That's okay. It's there.
Right.
And that happens to me all the time with everything.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I'm, I am very thoroughly read in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I've read all of them, and I've seen all of the productions of them, all of the TV shows and the movies and the radio shows. And really, it's kind of peculiar, but I'm very much like Sherlock Holmes, because his thing is other people would see the same things, but he would figure it out.
Right.
And, there's a little section in one of the stories where, Watson, his sidekick, is saying, how do you figure these things out? And he says to him, because they were roommates, how many stairs are there coming up to the second floor where we live? Watson said, I don't know. And he said, now look, you and I have been going up and down those stairs for years. There are 17 steps. I noticed that you didn't.
Right.
That's how I solved the cases. And that's sort of how I figured this out. I was able to look at it and just see that it was there.
There was a pattern.
Right,
Right.
right.
Yeah.
Pattern recognition. Now, everybody has pattern recognition, but it's a matter of degree, you know. So now when I was working as a human development engineer and I was helping people, I became aware late in my career, well, I'm not going to live forever and I'm not going to be helping people anymore. You know, I was cognizant of that. And I was also very cognizant of how many people can I help? You know, I help hundreds of people. And I thought, could I help 1,000 people one-on-one? Probably not. You know, I don't think I'll live long enough to get to 1,000 clients. So, but then when I discovered this, I said, oh, now I see. I can continue to help people after I'm dead.
Yes.
By putting it in this book.
Yeah.
Because I was very careful to write this in a way that once you have the book, you don't need anything else. You don't need to take classes, join a church, or anything else. It's just you and the book. So if you study it diligently and you apply it diligently, you will get the benefit.
I love that. I'm going to have to get a copy of this book myself and read through it and sort of figure out where I am and help me move along, help myself move along to the next sort of level that I want to, you know, take the step forward into.
Right.
I would love, if you're interested, to have you back again another time where we can chat even further about some of these, you know, different scales and the levels when I have a little bit more of knowledge and understanding of how it operates. Because I think that, you know, even just for the listeners, it'll be important or might be interesting for them to sort of, you know, go a little bit deeper and have a better understanding. And of course, I will be linking a copy or putting a link to your book so that if people are interested, they can certainly get a copy of the book for themselves. But would you say that this applies to everyone? Septemics?
Absolutely. It applies to across all the demographic spectrum. It applies to men, women, it doesn't matter what race you are, what ethnicity, what religion, what socioeconomic level, what education level, it applies to everyone. Now, having said that, let me tell you who it doesn't apply to. It doesn't apply to people who don't want to improve themselves or their lives.
Of course, yeah.
This is for people who want to improve themselves or their lives. Now, some people might make the mistake of thinking, well, everybody wants that, and that's not true. Psychopaths, sociopaths, torturers, war criminals, serial murderers, those people are not interested in improving themselves or others.
No.
Right? Then there are a lot of people who just want to sit on the couch, drink beer, and eat potato chips and watch the football game. That's it. Okay.
Yes, I was going to say there's another group of people that don't fall into that serial killer, psychopath category, but that are very complacent in their life and just not interested in changing.
Right. That's why I say it's for people who are interested in improving themselves or their lives. Now, why do I say themselves or their lives? Let's say you have a guy like Elon Musk, right? He's brilliant. He's perhaps the richest man in the world. He's world famous, right? He has a wonderful family, okay? So you can say, does he need this book? Yes. You know why? His kids are gonna have problems. His wife is gonna have problems. His employees are gonna have problems, right? His accountant might have a problem. His lawyer might have a problem. His mother-in-law, right? So he can pull out the book and say, come here, Joe, take a look at this. Because somebody like that, many people are connected to him, are dependent upon him, and vice versa. There's a lot of interdependence between him and all the different companies he runs. So,
Right. Mhm.
he is definitely somebody where, he might not need it for himself, but he certainly is going to need it for the people around him.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So, he might have a kid who has trouble in school, and he can use the scale of scholarship.
Mhm.
So, he might have some difficulty figuring out who he wants to vote for. Well, if you look at the scale of government, it tells you a lot.
Right. Right.
Everybody's talking about the left and right, right? There's no left or right. It's all made up. It's
Yes.
up or down.
Yes.
And that's what the scale shows you. It shows you the top of the scale and the bottom of the scale. And all 35 scales are like that. There's a top and there's a bottom.
Right. Right.
So just that alone, you look at this, you mean there's 7 levels of thought and there's a top and a bottom? And if you study it, you'll see that it is the way I present it. I mean, I would never present a scale unless I was axiomatically certain that it was correct.
Right.
For example, there's a scale of politics. It's the last one in the book. And it's the last one I figured out because it's such a mixed up, confused, problematic, difficult area, And it's a very unusual scale. If you study the scale, you'll see it's not, all the scales are unique, but this scale is like really very different from the other ones. So, took me a while to say, okay, I see how this is structured because, in order for me to write these, I had to be able to see it in my mind the way Tesla saw the alternating current motor in his head, or the way Einstein saw the theory of relativity. Where did that come from? Right? It came from his mind, right? He saw it in his, but it's absolutely true. It has been verified redundantly by experimental physicists. We know the calculations are correct. The equations are correct. So that's how this is. I know these are correct. Now, you could quibble with the way I articulated it or the words that I used. For example, you have to call the level something. There's a level there. It exists in nature. But in order for us to discuss it, I have to give it a name.
Right.
So I have to make a choice. Well, what am I going to call this? For example, the scale of sexuality, level 2, is called Take It or Leave It. Now you might say, what kind of a name is that for a level? So the reason I called it that is there are some people, it's a very small percentage of the population, whose attitude about sex is take it or leave it. These are very liberated people. If they ask the girl out and she says yes, that's great. And if she says no, that's great too.
Right.
Because he can take it or leave it. If the girl says, I'm breaking up with you, he says, okay. Because he can take it. So I thought, well, I'll just call it take it or leave it. Because everybody who knows English knows what that means.
Right. Simple.
So you read it, oh, okay. Because you see, when you have something that's not real in the person's life, you have to explain it in a way where he can comprehend it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a challenge. So I could see that some people might say, well, why did you call this? For example, the objective of the normal, which is the middle of the scale of basic purposes, is conformity. That's their objective. That's the largest demographic group. 30% of the population is at that level. Now you can say, well, conformity is not such a good thing. Well, first of all, who made you the king of the world to decide that conformity is not a good thing? That's number one. Number two, think of it in terms of fitting in. The normal wants to fit in. When the guys grow their hair long, he grows his hair long. When guys cut their hair, he cuts his hair. When guys grow a mustache, he grows a mustache. When they shave it off, he shaves it off. You know, when a guy when everybody starts buying SUVs, he buys an SUV.
Right.
Because he wants to fit in.
Mm-hmm.
That's who those people are. Those are the normal people at the middle of that scale. So that's what their objective is, conformity. So even if some people say, well, conformity is not a good thing, well, that's their objective. What do you want me to call it? You see? I could have called it fitting in, but that's what conformity is. Conformity is fitting in. So you see, there is some leeway semantically, what word are you going to call this thing? But realize I spent 25 years on this, going through thesauruses and figuring out what is the word that really describes this? Because finding the phenomena was one thing. I could see the phenomenon, there it is. This guy does this thing. But then I had to give it a label. So you might have an opinion that another label is better. Frankly, that hasn't come up. I don't have people calling me saying, why are you calling it this? It should be this. Although I wouldn't object to that. But I'm just saying, there is some leeway in the semantic element of it. But the scales themselves are correct.
Right.
That I know. I know it the way I know that the Pythagorean theorem is correct.
Right.
There's nothing you can do to me to convince me that the Pythagorean theorem is not right. Now, you could hold a gun to my head and say the Pythagorean theorem is not true. And I'd say, it's not true because I don't want to die. But I don't believe it, right? I don't believe it. You can't talk me out of that. Right. So, or, two sides of an isosceles triangle are equal. That's axiomatically true. You can't talk a mathematician out of that. Now,
there's no denying it.
You could.
There's no denying it. Yeah.
Right. Well, you might get some people who deny it. I mean, if you look at what goes on in the world, there are people who say men can have children. Oh, really?
Yes. That's an interesting, it's an interesting topic these days.
So I'm not going to argue with those people because I'm not an argumentative person. But, there are people that I thought this was a joke, but there actually are people apparently who think the world is flat.
Yes, there
Now,
are.
I could understand somebody thinking that 1,000 years ago.
Right.
But thinking it today, it's like, this person obviously doesn't know physical science. It's not only not true, it's impossible for that. We couldn't possibly have that. You just look at all the photographs that we have of all the celestial bodies. They're all spherical.
Right. Exactly.
So, I want people to use this and improve their lives, because I'm here to tell you, if you think the government or the universities or the corporations or the courts or any of these institutions, the churches, are going to improve your life, wake up.
No.
They all have access to crime. They all have internal conflicts. They all have, what's the word that lawyers use? Conflicts of interest. All of them. Okay?
They do.
So use the book to help yourself. Don't rely on anybody else. That's the beauty of this. It's you and your own literacy and integrity. It doesn't matter what religion I'm not asking you to change your religion, change your political party. I'm not asking you anything. Just get the book, study it. And if you study it, you will see that the scales are correct. Because I had a lifetime figuring it out.
Yes. I mean, you've definitely invested a lot of time and energy into perfecting this scale. And I think, you've told us about how much research you've done. So there's something to it, right?
Right, right. And I'll tell you, as an engineer, you have to realize, I know a lot of engineers. I went to engineering school. There were 2,000 students in this engineering school. We had our own building, okay? We had our own cafeteria.
Right.
So it was like a whole little world. Everybody in that building was an engineer. Not only the students, all the teachers too, right? So I know engineers, and I'm a typical engineer. Engineers are, like if you came to me and said, look, I want you to build a bridge across this river. It's about 100 yards wide. I would ignore that completely. I wouldn't take your data on the 100 yards wide. I would get out a laser beam and throw a laser beam across that, and it would give me a measurement. Okay, that's what I would trust. That's how I created these scales, the same way. Okay,
I love
and
that.
that's how I work with my clients. I know certain things are true. And when people present me with contradictions to it, it doesn't bother me at all. That is the beauty of being educated in a field.
When you know your stuff, you have the confidence, right?
Right. And it doesn't mean you're going to argue with the person.
Oh.
Or it doesn't even mean you're going to contradict the person. I don't contradict people unless there's a compelling reason.
Right.
Which rarely happens.
Well, thank you so much, Jim.
I want to say to your people, to your viewers, your success is my reward.
Oh,
That's what this is about.
That's very sweet. And I think that's what so many of us, in this line of work, when we're trying to help other people, that is ultimately what becomes fulfilling for us, is seeing the improvements and the growth and the evolution of another person. And that in itself is the most rewarding part for us, right? So I definitely appreciate that.
Right.
Jim, if people wanted to find you or know a little bit more about yourself, where could they find you?
Well, I invite your viewers to septemics.com, septemics.com, where you can see what readers have said about it, what journalists have written about it, what the reviews are. You can read sections of the book itself. And if you're interested, you can listen to a 15-minute pre-recorded explanation of septemics by the author.
Oh, I love that. I'll make sure to link the website in the show notes to make it easier for everyone. And I just have one final question for you. You've shared so much insights already, but can Septemics maybe help provide some tools, or do you have any tools or tips, any final thoughts that you can share with us on, if someone was looking to start their journey of, finding whether it's healing or balance or just even more joy out of their life. Is there like a particular, tip or tool that you have, or maybe a section of the book that might be able to help them?
Really, I've been asked some version of this question many times. My advice to you is get the book, even if it's only the ebook, which is only $10. Read the whole thing and then go back to the beginning after you've read it and find your level. Once you do that, you will be a new person. Then you can use it to find the levels of everybody around you. And then that will facilitate everything you do, because you will have clarity.
I love that.
Because people are mysterious to most people. Most people look at a person and they don't understand them. What's going on? Why does this guy do this thing? Right. Well, if you read the book, there it is. It's right there. It's all there. And because it's natural phenomena, it plays across all these dynamics, all these areas of interest. And so that's my advice.
So turn to the
A
book.
very small intestine.
I love that. I'll be linking the book as well in the notes, just again to make it easier for everyone and just so that they know where they can find it. But thank you again, Jim. I really do appreciate you sharing all of this information with us. As I said, I will be getting a copy of the book and reading it myself and, finding ways to improve my own life. And I would love to, maybe have you come back again for another episode where I can share maybe some of my thoughts of, how I've applied some of the scales or the different levels to my own life to create improvement. But also for you to sort of take us a little bit deeper so we can understand a little bit more about the different scales and the different levels. So if you're interested
Right.
in that, I would love to have you join us again, maybe in a couple months, and we can dive a little bit deeper.
Okay.
Perfect. Well, thanks again, Jim. It was lovely speaking with you today, and I look forward to connecting with you very soon.
Thanks, Carla. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me on this amazing episode of Awaken with Carla. I know that I learned quite a bit from Jim, and I hope that you have as well. Now, as we come to an end of this episode, I wanted to take a moment, as always, to just share with you some insights and wisdom that I gained from my conversation with Jim. First, I definitely need to read this book because I think that there's a lot of value in what Jim has created here with these hierarchies. And so the book, one of the things that I learned is that the book basically tells us across these different accesses, these 35 different areas of our life, let's say, where we are, at what sort of level we're at in these different areas, and maybe what we need to do in order to be able to move to the next level. And so, if we want to create change and movement in our life, then the first step is that we need to just move to the next level on that axis. So we can actually take this book as sort of a textbook for or a roadmap for how we can implement and what steps we need to take next in different areas of our life that can bring about much more happiness, fulfillment, and joy. The second thing is that understanding the sort of basic purpose how to apply Septemics to our personal lives. Once we understand the Septemic hierarchy and axes and the different levels, that basic understanding can actually give us insight into someone else. And by knowing that individual, we can actually know at what level and where they're at in sort of the different axes or the different hierarchies, what level they're at, and maybe we can encourage or find ways to support them, to help them along the way so that they can move to a different level in their own life in the different areas that they're seeking. And then lastly, that when we understand the different scales and the various levels that exist within each of those scales, this will actually help us to achieve our goals faster. And I know that's something that is important to me. And I know I can imagine that it's important to all of us out here that whenever we have a goal in mind or something that we want to achieve, we want to get there as quick as possible with the least amount of steps and, with the straightest line as we possibly can. And so from Jim, my conversation with Jim, he's basically enforcing that by understanding the different scales and the hierarchies and the various levels within these hierarchies, that we actually have a better chance at achieving those dreams and those goals at a much quicker pace. So I hope that you decide to pick up a copy of this book. I know that I have already picked up a copy. I just have to start reading it and just start to apply the various knowledge, information that I've gained from this into my life so that I can use this as a way to improve, to achieve, my goals and to just move forward in life. Now, remember that as we continue along this journey, that healing, self-discovery, spirituality, it is a lifelong pursuit, and it's not something that we can conquer in just one day. And so I continue to encourage you to go out there into the world and continue to explore, learn, and grow in your own unique way, and find different, different information that resonates with you, to help you along that person, to help you along the process and along the journey. Now, if you have any questions, or if you want to share your experience, or anything that you want to share with us, I certainly would love to hear from you. So make sure to connect with me, either by visiting my website or on my social media platforms. And you're not alone in this journey. So remember that you have someone in your corner that is ready to support you every step of the way. And if you need some help with this process and this journey, make sure that you reach out to me. And again, thank you to Jim, our incredible speaker, for providing us with this knowledge and sharing with us the information that comes from his book. And lastly, I wanted to thank you, our listeners, for being a part of this community and for helping me to grow this community and making it a thriving place where we can all come together and grow, learn, and transform. And so I remind you again, if you liked this episode, please share it with your family or friends, and make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so that you can keep getting more valuable content. And again, your support means so much to me that, we're doing this together, we're building this community together. And, it gives us an opportunity to tap into our own potential. And it helps me on my mission to support others in recognizing their own inner wisdom and greatness. Remember that the power to awaken and live your best life does lie within you and only you. And you have everything you need to manifest those dreams of your life and to create more purpose and meaning and joy. Until next time, keep embracing your self-discovery journey, nurturing your well-being, and awakening the extraordinary that lies within you. And stay tuned for more episodes of Awaken with Carla. May you find peace, love, and light on your path.